Hi, Sophie. We can see you today, Sophie.
Yes.
All right, so you see, we're probably waiting for a few more people, but we can start saying hello.
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 Hello, Sophie. Are you in?
Hello, Flaming. Hi, Ron.
Or you're somewhere else?
Hi, Sophie.
Hi, Ron. Sorry, I didn't hear your question.
Are you in Toulouse or are you somewhere else?
No, I'm in Toulouse. Thank you.
Okay, so I was planning that we were gonna, what's it called, live stream this on Facebook or something, but that was technically a little difficult because one can only do that in Zoom if one has the webinar mode, which costs a good deal extra. Otherwise, the idea is one can have a meeting and then it's streaming somewhere else on YouTube or on Facebook so that there can be an audience who's maybe looking at it and maybe leaving some questions or something in comments, but who might not otherwise show up. So there can be sort of several levels of interaction. That was part of the idea.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yes.
And there might be other ways of doing that. Like one can maybe get something that's in a window and have that be live streaming or something like that. Anyway, the topic today is about talking with strangers. Like, how does one actually talk with people one doesn't really know well, and how can one, hi, Harry.
Hi.
How can one scale it to maybe meeting more people who maybe just casually drop by or that we don't really know? Like, how does one deal with that? That's part of the theme. Hello, Tammy. You're having tea outside or coffee?
I am outside. I'll be moving around a little bit.
Don't get too much sun.
It's so beautiful.
Yes, it's lovely.
Hi, Sophie. Hi, Ron. Hi, Harry. Hi, Fleming.
Hi. You're chipper today. Harry's drinking whiskey.
Oh, that's awesome.
It's
kombucha. What is it? Buxwood Rügensaft. It's some kind of saft, which means like juice. Well, all these things.
Fruit forest.
Yeah, so it's like
fruit of the forest.
Okay, that's probably good.
I hope so. I do hope so. That's why I drink it.
Yeah. Okay.
My video's off just for a second, guys.
No problem.
I had a song in my head today. Don't give your love to strangers.
Yes, that makes sense. So, but that's what we're gonna do here. We're gonna give our love to strangers if any will show up.
Yes.
Is there some other way that strangers might show up other than the YouTube connection, which probably won't work today?
Well, what Tim is almost a stranger. We haven't seen him for a while.
Hi, Tim.
Hi, Tim.
Hello, strangers.
The stranger of the day.
So, I mean,
if
I mentioned.
we don't have a real stranger, we could behave strange ourselves, of course.
Yes, we can behave strangely. But well, I mentioned it on my Facebook stream, and I noticed a couple of my wall, and I noticed a couple of people said they were going to be there who wouldn't normally be there. So possibly some people show up. Hi, Lila. Your dad is always giving you such good stuff to eat.
Bosvruchten.
Okay, so the idea is also to have maybe a conversation about that, like how does one move from a small group of people who know each other well, who meet frequently, get to know each other's quirks and skills and so forth. How does one move from that to like dealing with strangers or with other people? Like part of my aims here is that we might be doing something that should work even if you haven't met before. It shouldn't really matter that you just met somebody. You shouldn't have to wait 2 months to get to know them before you can say something meaningful to each other. I think one can do that right away.
Have you experienced that yourself?
Yeah, I really treasure it when it happens. Personally, I don't have the requirement that I need to know them, and I actually really like it if we can skip that. We can just sort of connect on something right away, just start sharing what goes on, and it happens once in a while, not all that rarely. I'd like it to happen more often.
But that requires that the other one is of the same belief.
Maybe it requires something. I mean, that they're in a certain vibe, or they have some kind of natural or learned skill to be just present. Maybe. I mean, we see it sometimes here. Somebody new shows up who somehow can enter into it right away, like Luna or recently Erin, for example. They just show up and they're like totally comfortable and start sharing and participating right away. And we don't need to like get to know them first. And for me, that's kind of like an ideal. And maybe we can at least understand that better. Like, are there any requirements to that? What needs to happen for that to happen? Is it just a mindset, or what is it?
I'm not sure how. I'm trying to figure out how that it could just kind of usually work to make that happen or let that happen. And I'm still thinking about just everyone I've ever known and so forth. And some people are more, either naturally or maybe through learning, are more inclined, and some aren't. So what crosses all of that? What's almost totally universal that's going to fulfill this requirement? I don't know, but that's what I'm thinking about.
Can I share a little story from my life last night? So
Yes.
there's a local by-election for municipal city council, because we've got a very interesting political situation happening here in this province, and a city councillor left to, anyway, too much story. But there is a local candidate who is in the cannabis movement, and I'm helping to work on that campaign. And last night we had our first volunteer meeting. And as part of what we do is we did a round where everyone shared what they want to bring to the campaign, what they're passionate about in supporting this candidate. And so there was a purpose in what it was that we were sharing, but what was created in the group was powerful. And what it required was a purpose. So part of what Ron, I think, is talking about is circling around that purpose. But what that creates is an anchor for us to be able to have a shared intention and a shared place to share from. Anyways, a lot of the people that were at the meeting, there was 24 of us in the room, are medical cannabis users, and so essentially a lot of people were stoned. Um, but there was still this space between us that we were able to create by having a strong intention and by sharing from ourselves and who we are. And anyway, it was really powerful. And it was a lot of strangers in a group together, gathered for a common purpose. So I just wanted to share those little parts and pieces in terms of what, how we might want to anchor this, and if we can have that little conversation together.
I hear purpose and cannabis. Stunned.
So we have some of the elements, like personally, I can certainly see that a shared purpose will do it, or a shared need that's sort of somehow important. At the same time, I'm also looking for not needing the purpose necessarily. I think I treasure it more when there's not a purpose. Although, I mean, there are lots of purposes in the world, and it's meaningful to get together around them. But I also believe that it can happen without that.
So I think that sometimes we don't see what the purpose is. So what I've heard is there's a shared purpose of connection. So if nothing else, it's not for something external that we're all landing on, but rather a shared purpose to be able to connect with anyone at any time. So I just want to note that I've heard that and feel that.
Smart.
Yeah, I think when people are open enough and they intuit that there is a kind of trustworthiness in the group, then the thing you're talking about seems to happen. And I think the purpose then emerges from the conversation. It's not at all necessary to have a purpose beforehand. In fact, I feel like that can get in the way. But if everybody shows up and they're really there and there is that sense of trust and an openness, then the purpose tends to reveal itself in quite an elegant way. And often there can be multiple purposes happening at the same time, and they all seem to fit together. That's been my experience of when it works.
Yes, I would like to add my best experience of just meeting a random person and feel extremely connected. That's when it happened that I met somebody and there was apparently this natural fit and natural trust that I've had this is a great meetup. But what I remember for that there was no purpose, there was just a moment as it was, and I let go, and only later when I'm just back with normal connections and struggling in order to connect, then I remember, wow, this was easy, this was super interesting and very important. But the moment it happened itself, it felt so natural that I hardly recognized the significance and the specialness of it.
I notice with me that what I'm talking about, it has often been another person initiating it. I'd like to be able to somehow be better at doing it, but for me, it has often been that some very extroverted person somehow saw me and sort of felt, okay, we got something to talk about, and somehow we created a moment of intimacy sort of right away, where suddenly we were talking about something meaningful. But I wouldn't necessarily have neither guessed it or initiated it. Not that I'm super shy or anything, but I would often sort of wait for something to happen, kind of thing. So, and that can't be a very good strategy, but it works okay if there's some other people around who are really sort of extroverted and perceptive, who will like walk right up to me and see, okay, there's something, we got something here. I don't know how they do that, but it for me,
You
that has
just said it.
Yeah, well, but I mean, I can't necessarily follow that strategy myself. I don't necessarily know how to do that, but some people do. Well, I can just stand around and look interesting, and if there's some of those people around, then it will work. That's an idea.
Fleming, you dance, you know how to take the lead.
I do, but this is an area where, well, sometimes I can do it, but I don't habitually do that. I don't necessarily walk into a room and right away pick out a person that I know we're going to have a deep connection. I stand around and, well, I don't know if I could. I stand around and look at, well, what's going on here? And I might join an interesting conversation. And sometimes it works. Sometimes I end up sort of in the middle of a really exciting conversation. Sometimes I just stand around and I can't really find anything to connect with, and I sort of leave, kind of thing. Even though most likely there would have been some people there that really we would have had something to share. I don't necessarily know personally how to initiate it, even though I sometimes do.
I've done it, that I was in a group, and then at moments I felt really good. I just look around who looks interesting, and then I go to the person. I say, oh, "You look interesting," and that helps.
Well, I mean, your receptivity is also kind of coming into play. It's just as active as somebody who's outgoing, and do you see what I mean? It's a yin-yang thing. If you're making the space or creating that kind of negative space where you're available, then somebody will come fill it, I guess. Maybe that's more your nature in those situations. I don't.
It's true. Thank you for pointing that out. I sort of put myself down a little bit as I was just not doing anything. But really what's going on is I bring a certain vibe, but it's sort of more of an inviting vibe than it's an outgoing sort of making it happen. And some people who have their feelers out will notice that. So then it sort of matches. But some people who are too busy being in their own space might not notice me. So, okay, that gives me some clues at least.
Did you say that you were looking for something like this to work with more people and more encounters with more strangers?
Well, there are several themes like this. In part, how do you connect with strangers if you walk into a room? But there's also how do we here meeting together, how do we interact with new people who show up? Because some of the same things are at play. How can we preferably connect and do something interesting and useful right away rather than in several months?
Thinking about a little story, I recollect that happened a few months ago, not in France, but in Central Europe, in a big town. And I felt that there were some keywords that were said from somebody I had never met before, addressed only to me, that were kind of keywords, that words that open the door for connection and the door for immediate dialogue with that person. And they were very simple words, somebody who'd never met me before, somebody I had never met before. And I found it quite interesting that very simple words, unexpected, could trigger a dialogue straight away between two strangers in a street outside, very much at random. And we were talking about space, we were talking about yin and yang. I thought the first trigger were the words, and afterwards a hug and a kiss. So it was a combination of the physical proximity, the words, the hug and the kiss. But there were no shared purpose. I really cannot recollect any shared purpose at all. And it's not a town I'm used to live very often, so and it's not somebody I will see ever again. But I thought the big randomity of the meeting up did bring a very interesting connection straight away in a space of a few seconds.
I think if you're really present to what's going on, there'll be these little kind of flags waving at you in any situation. And maybe those words were like that for you, Sophie. So for whatever reason, and it could be words, it could be the way somebody smiles, it could be the way they move, it could be anything. But if you notice one of those kind of triggers and then you act on it, I think that's a doorway in to this thing we're talking about. So for instance, if a stranger comes onto the call and you have some kind of reaction to something they do, if you go for that, whatever it is, as a starting point, I think that's a way in. And I think that happens all the time with people, but maybe we don't act on the things we notice, or we don't even notice them, whatever, but it's going on all the time. These little flags are waving. I mean, I experience it sometimes in the world, in nature itself, where maybe a tree or a bird or something like that will catch my attention or come into my awareness. And I've started sort of following up on that, like going on these kind of journeys where I follow these signs that are leading this way and that, and some interesting things often happen.
Yeah, there's a whole spectrum of channels of for signals to pass through, and a lot of them we're probably not even aware of, and they're, metaphorically, they're like pheromones floating through the atmosphere of awareness, and it can be words and everything, all the things you said. So I'm still curious about the words, though, specifically that kind of signals and other kind of signals. Did you say that one of the words was specifically space and some other word, or did you not say what those words were?
I found it difficult to identify the words now.
Oh,
but
okay.
It was so quick. It was so quick that they were opening doors, obviously, and I was obviously in a situation to respond properly to those straight away without fear, as if I had known this person like a friend. And
how much of that might have worked if it was just maybe in text form online? In fact, I seem to recall you saying something like that once.
Yeah, exactly.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, I can receive some words online with only a picture of somebody on a social media and feel I connect the same way, except I cannot hug and I cannot kiss.
Right. Yeah.
So, but this precious, almost immediate sent out signal and received signals, it happens so rarely in real life, but a lot more often, I think, on the social medias. But I wish obviously it would happen more in real life. That's the objective, really.
So one thing that works for me sometimes is when somebody sort of bypasses normal filters and says something directly, but only under certain circumstances. Like one time I was giving a speech somewhere, I forgot about what exactly, but then right after my speech, this Russian girl came up and asked and said to me, why did you give that speech? Which was not an aggressive thing, but she was like just curious about what was my motivation to give that speech, which was a totally sort of shocking thing. Like normally I wouldn't think of doing that. And, but she went sort of straight to like not what was it about, not discussing some of the topics or anything, but like, why did I give this speech? And I loved her right away because it gave a connection that that worked really well, and we had something to talk about, because she sort of bypassed normal sort of politeness, or normally somebody would come up and ask some questions and we would talk about that, and it wouldn't get to the same place. She wanted to know why I specifically gave that speech, what was in me that I didn't otherwise share. At the same time, that could also be done wrong. I mean, people might come up and sort of aggressively want to know my motivation or something. I wouldn't have worked the same way. She was truly interested in what part of me wanted to come out there, and she helped bring that out because she knew how to do that. And Russians are often a little more sort of direct or something.
I like that story, Fleming. I often find Russian people being so direct and so open in their heart. And I think it's wonderful situations when it happens.
I'd like to see Sophie. You're always so dark on these calls. You're always in the shadows. I
I'm
have
not
a real desire in my heart to see you more clearly.
But I'm clear today, am I not?
I actually complimented her for being more visible than normally.
Yes, she's more visible than ever.
It is still,
Thank you.
your face is still in pretty low contrast.
Yes.
It's because there's no light on your face. So,
Better. Wow.
what happened? Wait a minute.
No. Yeah.
Is that
Wow.
better?
Oh my gosh.
Yes.
Incredible.
Great. Is that you?
Oh, that's Sophie.
Thank you very much.
The thing is, what I see of you and what each of us see of us is different.
Yes. Well, you can look. You can look at the recording how well you're seen by Fleming, at least.
Okay. Okay. Can I go and sit down again?
Yes. I don't know if Tim is okay with it. Oui,
So-
c'est mieux comme ça.
So how can we do it? Like, if some stranger showed up in our meeting here, is there something we collaboratively can do that together be able to see somebody more and maybe go sort of straight to the point? We can't necessarily count on any one of us always being able to do it, but maybe several of us can somehow get there faster, I imagine.
I think if we try to organize some way of doing it, we'll fail. We do it anyway, Fleming. Sorry for the short answer.
No, that's a good answer. I'm sure you're right. If we started making a system for it, it wouldn't work.
Well, we could have the intention to have an open heart to strangers.
I'm just wondering, Fleming, if you do, as you are the initiator and the facilitator, if you do receive some requests sometimes or some questions of interest about the group, and if you do receive some feedback from people who are interested to join, and if you know any mention or explanation from those people as to why they join, why they want to join, why they don't want to join, or I don't know.
Well, that's somewhat of a different thing. I mean, there are always people who ask to join the group. Every week there are a bunch of people who say they want to join, and now I just recently added Facebook has a feature, relatively recent feature, where one can give 3 questions that they need to answer, and I finally filled those in. Which was in part be how did they find us, why do they want to be a member, and do they have any experience with some kind of dialogue similar like this, something like that, which is more or less what I would want to know. But most people who fill that in, even if they get accepted into the group, will never show up. So it's not that easy to get people in here, even if they reach for it and they join, we might never hear from them again for whatever reason.
Do they watch the YouTube videos, or are we the only ones that can see them?
They can, people who join, they can see the links. So quite possibly some people watch them. In the past, I've run into people who would say that they've watched all our videos and they really enjoyed it, but I don't hear it very often. But there might be some weirdos out there who are like watching our every move, but who hasn't said anything.
Well, it's known that 80% doesn't move. They're just followers and whatever that you call it.
So yeah, Tammy.
Yeah, I'm just feeling into some of the pieces that I was really resonating with when we were more in the conversation part, which was around, what Tim said about that creating negative space that you're able to do. And I feel like part of this for me is about connection, right? It's about how we can be with each other. And I think there's some invisible pieces that, or the unseen, shall we call it, in listening and holding space and more of those feminine aspects, what can be known as that. And I think that those are the requirements. Like Tim, for example, talks about just showing up. And part of that is holding a space of listening while being in it as a full participant. So it's harder to language in English in words, but there's a sense and a power and a deep need. Yeah, this is what I was getting to, is that there's this deep need that we have for connection. And I think that part of, I call it purpose, but I think it's unseen purpose. It's like we want to connect. We want to be able to be together. And what's required for that is to be received, to be heard, and to listen.
Very nice. I really liked how both of you talked about negative space. I didn't personally think of it that way before, but that's part of, it's certainly something I recognize doing, but also it's something that I think is what works in a group like this, what we often do well, that we can call it different things, listening or being present, but it's kind of creating a space where we're willing to welcome something in, which includes a stranger, that we actually are willing to give them our attention, invite them to sort of come more out of themselves and share something with us, and we feel safe to do that. There's a space for it. It invites authenticity and showing up. So I suppose we are already doing that. We can be better at it, and we can maybe also still be aware of some of the things that are not it. Like there are some ways we can screw it up by maybe talking too much, or right away deciding what people are, or analyzing them, or there are lots of things we can do that probably aren't it. But I think a fair portion of the time we're already doing it.
And it's balanced out, of course, by the kind of yang side, the more positive side, if you want to use negative, positive, where you can be provocative, or you can ask questions, or you can kind of fill that space sometimes. But I would say it's the dance between the two, and when it falls down is when somebody is just talking and they've lost all sense of the group. They've gone off into their own story or their own kind of habitual thought processes or whatever, and that's when it kind of breaks down. So it's a play between the two, and we do that as individuals, but we also do that as a group. And you can do that with complete strangers. And maybe if you're more aware of that whole, or you've got all of this in your awareness when you're going into a situation with a stranger, you can perhaps steer it towards, you know, a more favorable outcome. I don't know, but yeah, I think it's pretty simple. Again, it's just coming back to that showing up and being present to what's going on, because it's always there in the moment. You know, all the information is right there if we can actually, you know, be there with it. That's the challenge for me anyway.
So I have just re-shared Fleming's piece and tagged us all. I hope that's all right. I just thought we would maybe progress the ability for someone to be able to just drop in. So I don't know if anybody else wants to also share it, or, but just in aid of perhaps having a real live experiment with someone coming in to join us.
I think an intriguing puzzle is how to do the active part well, the sort of yang part, because I agree, it's not just that we're sort of sitting here quietly and attentively waiting for something or someone. It's also that we can sort of ask the right question. Why did you come here? What do you have in your heart? Why are you in the world? Something that's like more might be unexpected or direct or something. So the tricky part is to have an intuition that works about that. So we're not just sort of blabbering away, but we're putting our finger in a place where something happens.
One of my favorite parts of these experiments is when we do rest into silence. And I'm breaking it, I know, but the feeling of that, you know, making something concrete and male and speaking, like to direct by speaking is part of what's happening. And I think that the skills that we're building are around how we know when next to speak and to just rest into that.
And sometimes a little bit of policing is necessary if somebody is going off on one, to just step in and say, you know, shut up. Or something more subtle, which I'm not good at.
Do you want to be the police officer, Tim? Officer Tim? One reason I like dancing is that it's both active and passive at the same time. It's not, it almost never gets lost in sort of abstract thinking kind of thing. Like you walk up to somebody and often non-verbally invite them to dance with you, and then you have to be receptive to, well, how do we want to move? And both people need to be receptive to that, and then you move together and you sort of discover something together that you didn't quite know or expect that you created at the moment. And it doesn't happen unless you do something, and it doesn't really happen unless you pay attention to what's done, what's happening. So it's kind of the same kind of thing, that you need to show up, you need to see who's there, you need to start moving with the people that are there, and you need to do a move and see how they respond to it, and then you can respond to that, and that creates a dance or song or a conversation.
Yes, I agree. Thank you.
And this collective space is like the music which is going on, you know, and if you're listening to that at the same time, the whole thing weaves together.
Further, what you just said, Fleming, it seems quite obvious that our words and the only few centimeters square that we can see of each other are so small compared to all of our body mass, and so kind illusionary compared to our body language. And sometimes I wonder what has made those experiments to last so long with only a few centimeters square of only our faces that have been showing up every week. I still have got this question open. I always wonder, but I think the reason is probably the connection, which is enjoyable, and each of us personally, what we are having or developing during those experiments. And now I've lost what you just said before. Yeah, we were talking about music. And music, I'm just dreaming what would happen if we would all really meet in presence, in physical presence. I'm just dreaming of that moment.
Could you tell a little more?
I think there's a kind of energetic dimension here, which I certainly feel like it doesn't matter that there are just these little screens, or there are times when I feel like we're completely there with each other. And I would call that an energetic connection, which I don't think operates in the same dimension as all of this. So, you know, it doesn't matter where you are in the world or what's going on. It can instantaneously be there, that connection. Yeah.
I think that connection is, even though it's not happening in our physical presence, if it's strong enough, or if it's just happening at all, it has a physical effect, though. It's still physical.
I think it would not really work if it really just was these few centimeters of our faces. It's because we perceive something more, which is certainly more than the visual, and it's more than the words. It's kind of like when I drive around in my car, I'm scared of people who actually drive their cars visually. Like, I imagine there are some people who actually only navigate by what they can see out of their eyes. And that freaks me out of my skull, because there's lots of things you can't see. The only way you can drive safely is by being psychic, by somehow perceiving something more, by having some awareness of the car that might come out that is hidden behind a wall. At least a little bit. I mean, you don't have to be very psychic, but you do have to have a sense of more than what you see. Otherwise, you're in trouble in life a lot of the time. And I think it's the same here, that this works because we perceive a little more than what we see.
And that's, sorry, Ron, you go ahead.
Well, in your example, Fleming, there may be more to it, but one way you could characterize it is just to have either just peripheral awareness, peripheral. And, you know, and I remember attending some seminars with a guitar teacher, not well known publicly, but a great educator and well known in some musical circles. And one of his points he made was that in communicating with an audience or just being in a room as a performer, to increase your peripheral awareness. And then he played a song from the stage, and I saw him doing it. For one thing, he kind of went back and forth like this, kind of like a cat would do when it's trying to gauge the dimensions. It's going to make a jump or something. So it's very much like that, and so it's very physical. And I really got the idea from seeing him do that, and it's really been a pretty deep part of a lot of stuff I do. And it also takes on metaphorical strength too, and just as your example did. And I think it's related, even though it's seemingly a whole other thing. Peripheral.
Yeah, I like that word, Ron, peripheral. And that's probably a word I'm going to use again to describe the connection I had with this person I met. And I was giving the little story earlier on, which means that for me, there was not a central command in command, but the peripheral were plugged in, that's the word. So I very much like this word. Thank you.
I just also want to add that I actually worked on it. So in my experience, you can work on it, and just physically. Right at the moment, I'm just being more aware of the periphery. And the more you practice it, it kind of works out that you're kind of visual, not just in your imagination, but in actual vision and awareness. It's more like about 180 degrees instead of the usual 60 degrees or whatever. And so just physically doing this also just changes your brain, I think. And it has other, like I said, it takes on other meanings. You can sort of apply it metaphorically in a lot of ways, even in an environment where there's no physical space.
We also we might miss how much information is available. An enormous amount of information is available for us. A lot of it is peripheral. So sometimes if we only focus on what we think is in front of us, we greatly oversimplify things. A lot of the really valuable stuff is more sort of in the air or in the periphery. And we might not always notice that different people are sort of doing that to a different degree. Like, as Ron was just talking, if I, in my mind, if all I was aware of, there's a guy with glasses and he's saying something, and if that's what I sort of captured, the guy with the glasses, he spoke. Okay, and some people might actually think of it that way, that they
It's a good start.
it wasn't any deeper. The guy in the dark with the glasses, he spoke. Where really there's a zillion billion more to it. I mean, I know you better than that, but some people sort of interact with the world a little bit like it's just cartoon figures. So somebody said something about Donald Trump. I'll give you my Donald Trump thing, where really there's a lot more nuance to it. And that's developed by being aware of the periphery, the context, what you intuitively, psychically, or whatever are available, are aware of.
I have an association with what connects to what's been said earlier. When I'm somewhere and I want to connect, I tend to look for those who are aware of their surroundings and kind of awake and attentive. And those are the people who are basically open for connection. And not the people who are like this here and just staring at whatever they're staring at.
Yeah, I really am really enjoying these different themes of awareness and like being aware of the periphery. For me, that is sort of sensing into the spaces in that listening way, right? And is continuing to kind of point us towards that, the full connection and how we can use our senses to be a part of a group. And I'm randomly going to share something else that I read in this book that I'm in love with called Original Thinking. And it one of the things that the author is doing is having us look at our perception of time. And one of the things that stuck with me is that the ancient Greeks saw the past as in front of them because they could see it, and the future behind them and coming through them. So they couldn't see the future, that was behind them. But the past they could see. And there's this, I don't know, I'm not sure why I'm bringing this in, but I loved that reframing just to be able to kind of sense into these different ways of knowing and these different assumptions that we have around reality and the world around us. Because I also feel that this work that we're doing is sort of breaking down a lot of assumptions around connection and showing these, you know, we're kind of modeling non-local reality and some quantum field pieces. And I think it's useful for us to feel into, you know, some of the assumptions we have and how we can reframe things to feel into them in a different way.
We're all behind Harry. We're behind you.
We're in your future, Harry.
I'm grateful.
And the peripheral vision in that particular analogy will be the present.
To me, that illustrates also, well, the value being often in sort of the framing or the periphery. It's partially explains my personal resistance to some things that are too focused, like if somebody wants to set a topic for, okay, what are we talking about, or what's the goal here, what's the thing. To me, that's like scary, because then we're kind of like doing like this, and we might be missing the periphery. So where I find the most value in what sort of happens around it.
Yes, yeah. My sense of you is that you love the undefined. This could be a purpose.
And in a sense, also that which I love so much, the undefined unknown, but particularly in the sort of unfolding emerging sort of sense. We could say that that's in a way the stranger, or the strangers to invite in, that it's like that which we don't really know yet, but which is very welcome, which we would like to meet. That might be a person, some people, or it might be an awareness or something, a project to do together. It might be all sorts of things, but it's, in order for that to happen, we need kind of to have that negative space be inviting and present, paying attention, interacting with it until we get more of a sense of what it is and what its periphery is.
There aren't any strangers. There are only strange ways of interacting with people.
And actually, I really like strangeness too. I mean, things are boring if it's just sort of the same old way that you do what you're supposed to do, the way you're supposed to do it, the way you were planning it. Then we're sort of missing the new discovery, unfolding something. So strangeness is, in a certain way, a path to that.
I've really loved this session, and just, again, sort of touching in and going deeper with each other, even though we haven't had any strangers necessarily join us. Yeah, it's been really nourishing to be with you all.
Yeah, I think I've enjoyed it too, even if no strangers showed up. But it does come something sort of interesting also in being available for strangers to show up, even if there aren't any. That doesn't mean we're sort of being bored or doing nothing. But there's something to say for a readiness, ready for whatever might come, which is good.
I like readiness, being here now for what might present itself, or himself or herself, or anything else.
I think there's something very touching as well, which is that the six of us, we've pretty much been in the experiment since the beginning. 5 of us, yeah. You're doing accounting. Sorry. Oh, sorry. Yes, hello. I'm so sorry. And this this expression of readiness, it's excellent, because I don't know how many of us had thought of the idea waiting for strangers and being ready for it, but I didn't. I like that there's this emergence of purpose at the end, or towards the end, I don't know. Yeah, towards the end of our session. That's great.
I have to leave right at 9, so yeah. Grateful. Awesome.
There's no problem, it's 6 here.
Yeah, you've got 4 hours at least.
Well, anyway, we're ready, so we're about done. And ready for new adventures another time. So how about we just end here? Some of you can stay for a little planning session afterwards. I think this was lovely, and hope to see you again, and maybe some strangers.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.